Let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a bizarre, true crime story straight from the natural world. And get this, it features what is quite possibly the deadliest feline assassin in recorded history. I'm absolutely thrilled to guide you through this because it's a fascinating, honestly kind of tragic look at just how incredibly delicate our ecosystems really are. The number 1. Just 1. That is the unprecedented number of individual animals it takes to wipe out an entire species in our story today. Usually when we think of extinction, we picture massive asteroids striking the Earth, sprawling climate shifts over millennia, or maybe huge populations of invasive species just completely taking over a continent. But here, in this specific historical event, it literally just took one single individual. We all know cats have lived alongside humans for thousands of years, right? We brought them on our ships to protect grain from rodents, and felines are, for sure, rightfully famous for their incredible skill at eradicating mice, rats, and birds. But out of all the cats in the long history of human civilization, no single feline can match the unbridled bloodlust displayed by a humble lighthouse keeper's pet. His name? Tibbles. And Tibbles has become infamous in the annals of science as the absolute only animal ever definitively known to have wiped out an entire species completely by himself. No help, just Tibbles. So let's move into part 1, the victim. A bird like a mouse. Normally, when you think of a bird, it flies through the air, perches in trees, and basically behaves exactly how you'd expect a typical bird to avoid danger. But the Stevens Island wren? It was entirely different. By all accounts, this bird was an absolute evolutionary marvel that broke all the standard rules. It actually lost the ability to fly completely. Its wings became functionally useless for taking off. Instead, it shrank down to roughly the size of a tiny rodent and spent its days just sprinting at absolute top speed through the thick coastal underbrush. The only standard bird-like trait it actually kept from its flying ancestors was its ability to sing.
Now you might be wondering, why on earth would a bird evolve over millions of years to act exactly like a mouse? Well, to understand that, we have to look at the concept of an ecological niche, which is essentially the specific role or function an organism fits into within its environment. See, because of deep geographic isolation, there were absolutely zero native land mammals in the corner of the world where this bird evolved. No mice, no rats, no ground predators whatsoever. And as they say, nature absolutely hates a vacuum. With those roles entirely empty, the wren adapted perfectly to fill the ecological niche of a small, scurrying ground forager. It literally became the mouse of its environment.
Which brings us to part 2, the stowaway rat invasion, the prelude to disaster. So how exactly did this fragile, musical, mouse-like bird end up in a situation where it was so incredibly vulnerable? Well, at one time, long ago, these wrens didn't just live on a tiny island. They called the entire mainland of New Zealand home, just thriving out there in the expansive underbrush. But then, South Pacific Islanders arrived on their ocean-going ships, and they unknowingly brought stowaway rats with them. Those rats rapidly invaded the local ecosystem, and because the wrens had evolved in an environment with zero natural ground-dwelling predators, they had absolutely no defense mechanisms. They couldn't even fly away. They were completely helpless against the sudden onslaught of such powerful predators, and they were rapidly exterminated across the entire mainland. These predatory rats were incredibly efficient. The wrens were wiped out everywhere across the massive expanse of New Zealand, except for their very last rat-free redout, Stevens Island. And guys, this was a spectacularly tiny, roughly 1 square mile spit of jagged rock situated just off New Zealand's northern coast. Surrounded by the rough waters of the Cook Strait, this was their absolute last sanctuary on planet Earth. All right, part 3. Tibbles gets to work. The feline assassin arrives.
Up until the late 19th century, the wrens were actually completely safe on this tiny rock, just living peacefully, without any ground predators. But things shifted dramatically in the year 1894. That's when a brand new lighthouse was established on the island. The newly appointed lighthouse keeper, a guy named David Lyall, moved into his isolated new post, and he decided to bring along his pet cat, Tibbles, for some much-needed company. Honestly, you can only imagine the sheer sensory overload this cat must have experienced upon stepping off the boat, only to find an entire, enclosed island absolutely overrun with thousands of bite-sized, flightless birds just scurrying right along the ground.
Driven by deep predatory instincts, Tibbles got straight to work. He began relentlessly attacking the little creatures, wherever he found them hiding in the coastal ferns. And the crazy thing is, we only know the specifics of this grim campaign because Tibbles proudly alerted his owner to his new hobby by creating quite the gruesome evidence log. Night after night, this cat hauled more than a dozen of his tiny victims right back to the lighthouse, depositing them directly at Lyall's feet. Every single one of them arrived either completely dead or, mere moments away from it. It was basically a masterclass in the terrifying efficiency of a single apex predator unleashed in a completely naive ecosystem.
And that leads us to Part 4, Discovery and Instant Extinction, the tragic punchline.
Just look at the horrific speed of this whole historical event. Following the initial stowaway rat invasion that cleared out the mainland centuries prior, 1894 marks the fateful moment the lighthouse, Lyall, and Tibbles actually arrive on Stevens Island. Because of the sheer strangeness of the little dead birds Tibbles was continually bringing back to the door, Lyall actually preserved several of the bodies. They eventually found their way into the hands of leading ornithologists. So, in 1895, this entirely unique little animal was officially unveiled to the scientific world. And then, almost in the exact same breath, it was declared extinct. 1 single year. That's literally all the time it took. The scientific world officially gave the bird the Latin name Xenicus lyale. And wow, talk about an incredibly ironic permanent memorial in the scientific record. This fascinating little bird is named to forever honor the very lighthouse keeper whose pet systematically hunted it into total oblivion. So what should we ultimately take away from all this? What is the overarching lesson of Tibbles and the wren? Well, we are looking at a uniquely fragile fauna, deeply isolated by millions of years of distinct geography, where the sweeping ecological destruction inaugurated by a pack of stowaway rats was, tragically and ironically, finalized in just 12 months by a single, lone, domestic cat. It leaves us with a provocative and, honestly, darkly humorous final thought that clearly never occurred to the lighthouse keeper or anyone else at the time. Given the extreme, absolute fragility of nature and how perfectly adapted these little birds were to an environment without predators, it might have been a very good idea to make Tibbles an indoor cat. It really forces us to ask, as our global footprint rapidly expands today, what other seemingly harmless companions or everyday habits are unwittingly pushing fragile ecosystems to the brink of extinction right under our noses? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this bizarre piece of ecological history leaves you with a profound new appreciation for the incredibly delicate balance of our natural world. Catch you next time.